Ibrahim Traoré found his old school friend, begging, "You won't believe what he did." The sky over Ouagadougou had turned into a sheet of steel, and the first rains of the season came down with a force that blurred the outlines of the streets, washing away the dust and turning potholes into shallow ponds. Horns blared from impatient taxis. The cries of street vendors were swallowed by the drumming of rain on tin roofs, and people dashed for shelter, wrapping themselves in plastic or ducking under makeshift awnings. Inside a plain, unmarked SUV making its way through the traffic, President Ibrahim Traoré sat in the back seat, returning from an unpublicized visit to an irrigation project on the outskirts of the city, a trip he had chosen to make without the trappings of officialdom. He preferred this, seeing things for himself, talking directly to farmers, feeling the mud under his boots, and avoiding the layers of ceremony that so often separated leaders from the reality of their people. As the vehicle slowed at a congested intersection, Ibrahim's gaze drifted out of habit, scanning the pavements, the shop fronts, the faces half hidden by rain. And then, abruptly, he stopped breathing for half a second. Huddled under the rusting overhang of a corrugated roof sat a man whose clothes were nothing more than rags clinging to a thin frame. Rainwater streamed down his face, plastered his shirt to his skin, and pooled at his feet. In front of him lay a cracked plastic bowl, its shallow contents, some coins, a few small bills, pitiful against the enormity of the storm. His head was bowed, shoulders hunched, but when he looked up, the eyes that met Ibrahim's were like a punch from the past. Those eyes, dark, alert, and achingly familiar, were the same eyes Ibrahim had once seen every day in the classroom of a small village school. "Moussa," Ibrahim whispered, almost to himself, but the word felt loud in his chest. The driver glanced in the mirror. "Mr. President?" he asked cautiously, but Ibrahim didn't answer. The man on the pavement wasn't just another beggar to be passed by with a flicker of guilt. He was Moussa, the boy who had shared roasted peanuts with him under the neem tree during recess, who had beaten him in a barefoot race across the dusty football pitch and laughed until they both fell to the ground. That boy was now a shadow of himself, sitting in the rain with shame and disbelief tangled in his gaze. Ibrahim's decision was instantaneous. "Stop the car," he ordered, and before the driver could fully pull over, he was already opening the door. Gasps rippled through the small knot of people at the intersection as they recognized the tall, uniformed figure stepping into the downpour without an umbrella. The sight of the president of Burkina Faso striding across the street toward a beggar was enough to make a fruit vendor freeze mid-sail. Ibrahim's boots splashed through water as he reached the corner. "Moussa," he said again, standing before the man. The beggar's lips trembled. "Ibrahim? No, it can't be." "It's me," Ibrahim replied, voice steady, eyes locked on his friend's. Moussa tried to stand, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of a sudden urge to erase the picture he was presenting, but his legs betrayed him, buckling under his weight. Without hesitation, Ibrahim caught him by the arm, holding him upright as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Come," the president said simply. "We're going somewhere dry." He didn't ask how it had come to this, not yet. There would be time for that later. For now, the priority was to get him out of the storm. A few minutes later, in the corner of a small cafe whose staff had scrambled to accommodate the unexpected guests, Moussa sat wrapped in a clean blanket, steam rising from a chipped mug of tea between his hands. Ibrahim, still damp from the rain, sat across from him, studying the face that had been altered by years of hardship, but was still, undeniably, Moussa's. The conversation began awkwardly, the years between them heavy in the air. "I heard you became a soldier," Moussa said, his voice rough. "I did," Ibrahim answered. "And you?" Moussa's eyes dropped. "Life took me down different roads." Bit by bit, his story came out. A factory injury that cost him his job, a small mechanic business that failed when equipment was stolen, debts that grew faster than he could pay, the death of his wife during childbirth, and then the slow erosion of everything that tied him to stability. By the time the pandemic struck, he was sleeping in doorways, living on the few coins strangers dropped into his bowl. Ibrahim listened in silence, his hands folded, his gaze unwavering. There was no pity in his expression, only a deep, steady compassion, the kind that sees the whole person rather than the state they are in. When Moussa finished, the rain outside had softened to a drizzle. "You're not staying on the streets anymore," Ibrahim said, his voice calm, but leaving no room for argument. For many, helping would have meant handing over some money, perhaps enough for a few days' food, and leaving. But Ibrahim knew that such charity was like pressing a thin patch over a deep wound. It might cover the problem for a moment, but it would not heal it. He remembered something else. In school, Moussa had been gifted with his hands. Once, after Ibrahim's slingshot had snapped, Moussa had repaired it with nothing but a strip of leather and a piece of wire, making it even better than before. Skills don't disappear, Ibrahim said quietly now. They just need a chance to be used again. And in that moment, his mind began to work, not just on how to shelter Moussa tonight, but on how to rebuild his life from the ground up, in a way that would restore his dignity, his independence, and his place in the world. It would be an act of kindness, yes, but also one of strategy, because Ibrahim Traoré understood something that too many leaders overlooked. When you save one person with care and foresight, you plant a seed that can grow into hope for many others. That night, Ibrahim did not send Moussa to a shelter, nor did he hand him a bundle of banknotes and wish him luck. Instead, he quietly arranged for a discreet government vehicle to take Moussa to a small rehabilitation center on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, a facility not advertised to the public, but known among social workers as a place where people could rebuild their lives without judgment or humiliation. It was late when they arrived, and the compound smelled faintly of eucalyptus and rain-soaked earth. Moussa was shown to a modest but clean room with a proper bed, fresh clothes, and a hot shower. The next morning, over a simple breakfast of millet porridge and tea, Ibrahim returned, this time in plain clothes. He wanted this to be a conversation between two men, not between a president and a citizen. Sitting across from Moussa in the dining hall, he laid out his vision. "You don't need sympathy," Ibrahim began. "You need a way back to standing on your own feet, and that means we're not going to treat you like a case to be solved, but as a man with skills that can be sharpened." Moussa listened silently, perhaps still unsure whether this was real or just a burst of political theater. Ibrahim explained that the center ran a quiet pilot program he had personally supported. Vocational retraining tailored to the individual. It wasn't charity, it was an investment. Mechanics, carpentry, agricultural innovation, electrical work. The aim was to connect people's existing abilities with the needs of the community. And more importantly, graduates were offered a path to employment or the means to start their own small businesses. "You were always good with your hands," Ibrahim reminded him. "You fixed that old bicycle for the school principal when no one else could. You built a wooden cage for the footballs. That skill hasn't left you. We just need to bring it out again." Moussa's eyes flickered with something that had been missing for years, the faint glint of pride. "But why me?" he asked quietly. Ibrahim leaned back, his tone both gentle and firm. "Because you're my friend, and because if we don't help the people who once ran beside us, we forget who we are." Then, after a pause, he added, "And because I want the country to see that no one is beyond redemption, not the man begging at the corner, not the soldier with scars, not the farmer whose crops have failed. We rebuild together or we fall apart alone." Over the next weeks, Moussa's days were structured with purpose. Mornings began with light physical exercises to restore his strength. Afternoons were spent in the mechanical workshop, his hands relearning the precision of working with tools, oil, and metal. Evenings brought small group sessions where others shared their journeys. Former street vendors, ex-soldiers, widows, each carrying their own history of loss, but also their own spark of resilience. Ibrahim visited often, never making a show of it. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with one of the program's trainers. He asked practical questions. What tools are missing? How's the progress on the generator repairs? What would make your work easier? These were not idle queries. Each was followed by action. A week later, a new set of wrenches would appear. The next day, a shipment of spare parts from a local supplier. Ibrahim treated Moussa not as a man to be pitied, but as a craftsman reclaiming his trade. Behind the scenes, Ibrahim also made strategic arrangements. He contacted two small auto repair shops in Ouagadougou, whose owners had once served in the army, men he knew would value loyalty and skill over formal credentials. He convinced them to take part in a return-to-work partnership, offering them tax incentives if they hired graduates from the center. This wasn't just about helping Moussa. It was about setting up a sustainable bridge between rehabilitation and real employment. As Moussa's abilities resurfaced, so did fragments of the man he used to be. He began staying late in the workshop, tinkering with old engines just for the satisfaction of hearing them run again. He laughed more, spoke more, and even started mentoring a younger man at the center who had lost his arm in an accident, but was learning to adapt his techniques. The transformation was visible, not only in his appearance but in the way he carried himself. One evening, as the sun sank and the smell of charcoal fires drifted in from the nearby village, Ibrahim and Moussa sat outside on a bench. "Do you remember," Moussa asked, "the time we tried to build that go-kart from scrap wood?" Ibrahim chuckled. "We couldn't get it to turn without tipping over." "We didn't have the right tools," Moussa said thoughtfully. "Now I do." There was something in his voice, a mixture of nostalgia and a forward-looking determination, that told Ibrahim his friend was ready for the next step. But for Ibrahim, the plan was never just to restore one man's livelihood. He understood that individual stories, when shared, could ripple across the country, shifting how people thought about poverty, dignity, and second chances. And in Moussa's case, he had the perfect opportunity to do just that. The announcement would come soon, but before it did, Ibrahim wanted Moussa to be truly prepared, not for a handout, but for a platform from which to stand tall again. The morning the plan shifted from quiet rebuilding to public transformation began like any other at the rehabilitation center. The rhythmic clink of tools in the workshop, the low murmur of conversations over breakfast, and the smell of oil mingling with fresh bread from the kitchen. But Ibrahim Traoré's arrival broke the routine. He didn't come alone this time. With him were a small camera crew from the state broadcaster, 2 journalists from independent papers, and the Minister of Labor. It wasn't a political stunt. Ibrahim had given explicit orders that there would be no staged speeches, no fabricated drama. The purpose was to show something real, raw, and unpolished. A man who had fallen, getting back up. Moussa was caught off guard when Ibrahim entered the workshop. His hands were black with grease, his shirt damp with sweat, as he was bent over an old Peugeot engine. "Morning, Moussa," Ibrahim said, smiling as though he were greeting a fellow craftsman, not a subject of the state. Moussa stood, a little embarrassed at the presence of cameras. "Mr. President." "What's all this?" he asked cautiously. Ibrahim stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only Moussa could hear. "It's time the country saw what you can do, not what you were reduced to." The journalists watched as Moussa explained his repair process, demonstrating the adjustments he'd made to an old carburetor to improve fuel efficiency. His hands moved with confidence now, the tremor of shame replaced by the steadiness of skill. The reporters weren't fed talking points. They asked real questions, and Moussa answered them plainly, telling the truth about how he had ended up on the street and how this program had given him structure, dignity, and work again. His honesty resonated more than any politician's speech could. After the tour, Ibrahim gathered the small group outside under the shade of a neem tree. "This is Moussa," he said, addressing the cameras. "He's my friend. Years ago, we ran barefoot through the same dusty schoolyard. Life took us down different roads. Mine to the army, and here, his to hardship and loss. But here's the truth. Moussa never stopped being capable, never stopped being valuable. Our nation cannot afford to throw away its people because they've stumbled. Every skill, every pair of hands, every mind, they matter. And when we rebuild one life, we rebuild part of Burkina Faso." There was no applause, no scripted cheer. Just a quiet, grounded moment that carried its own weight. What the cameras didn't see was that Ibrahim had already lined up the next step. Through the return-to-work partnership he had negotiated with local auto shops, Moussa was being offered not just a job, but a co-ownership arrangement with one of the smaller garages in Ouagadougou. The shop's current owner, a retired sergeant named Diallo, had been looking for someone trustworthy to take over day-to-day operations while he focused on training apprentices. Moussa was a perfect fit. Skilled, reliable, and, thanks to Ibrahim's initiative, no longer invisible to opportunity. When Ibrahim told him about the offer later that day, Moussa was silent for a long moment. "Why me? There must be others," he began, but Ibrahim cut him off with a shake of the head. "Because you've proven you're ready, and because when people come to your garage, they'll see more than a mechanic. They'll see a man who stood back up. That will matter more than you think." The first week at the garage was a test of both endurance and confidence. Customers, initially skeptical, warmed quickly when they saw Moussa's work. Diallo praised his leadership, noting how he organized the workspace and mentored younger apprentices. Word spread that the man who had once been seen begging at the corner was now running a clean, efficient shop. Business picked up, but Ibrahim's vision stretched beyond a single garage. Quietly, he asked his staff to compile a list of other skilled but unemployed citizens, welders, carpenters, tailors, who had fallen through the cracks. The idea was to replicate Moussa's journey on a wider scale, pairing rehabilitation graduates with small business owners who needed reliable partners. By anchoring each story in a real human transformation, the program avoided the bureaucracy that often drained the life out of social initiatives. One evening, after closing up the shop, Moussa found Ibrahim waiting outside in his SUV. They drove through the city as the sun set, casting long gold shadows over the streets. "You know," Moussa said slowly, "when I was out there, on that corner, I didn't think anyone saw me. People looked past me like I was part of the pavement. But you stopped." Ibrahim kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was steady. "That's the problem with the world, Moussa. Too many people think they can't make a difference unless they can save everyone. But saving one person, really saving them, changes everything for both of you." As the lights of Ouagadougou flickered on, Ibrahim knew the real work was only beginning. Helping Moussa was not an isolated act of kindness. It was the blueprint for something larger, something that could ripple through communities like a quiet revolution. One life rebuilt at a time. 3 months after Moussa first stepped into his new role at Diallo's garage, Ouagadougou was buzzing with a story that seemed too improbable to be true. A man once known as the quiet beggar at the corner of Avenue Kwame Nkrumah was now the co-owner of one of the busiest repair shops in the city. Customers came not just for the mechanical work, but to shake his hand, to hear his story, to witness with their own eyes the transformation that had spread across the capital like an ember catching dry grass. Newspapers ran headlines that read, "From Streets to Success, the Moussa Story," and even foreign outlets picked it up as a testament to Burkina Faso's new approach to rehabilitation. Ibrahim Traoré understood that the timing was perfect. The country was in a period where morale mattered as much as policy. Years of instability, economic challenges, and distrust in leadership had left many citizens believing that no system could truly serve them. By spotlighting Moussa's journey, Ibrahim was doing more than telling a feel-good tale. He was proving that leadership was not about speeches, but about the strategic and moral courage to invest in people others had written off. The president's office announced a national initiative called Hands Back to Work, modeled after the same program Moussa had completed. It would pair unemployed or displaced citizens with small businesses willing to train and employ them, offering microloans for tools, tax breaks for participating business owners, and structured mentoring to ensure skills turned into sustainable income. This was not welfare. It was a calculated system to turn latent talent into productive, self-reliant livelihoods. Moussa became the unofficial ambassador of the program. He visited vocational centers, spoke to people still struggling with homelessness, and told them the truth, that recovery was hard, that pride sometimes made you resist help, but that a second chance was worth seizing with both hands. His words carried a weight no politician could match, because he had lived the fall and the climb. At every stop, he reminded people, if someone reaches out, take the hand. And when you found your footing, reach back for the next person. The ripple effect was undeniable. In Ouagadougou, a former street vendor was now running a thriving carpentry shop. In Bobo Dioulasso, a woman who had once scavenged scrap metal was now training as an electrician. In Fadan Gourma, an ex-miner injured on the job was repairing agricultural machinery for local farmers. Each success story fed the next, and the narrative of hopelessness began to crack. One evening, under the fading gold light outside the presidential residence, Ibrahim and Moussa sat together on a bench, watching the city lights blink to life in the distance. "Do you ever think," Moussa asked quietly, "what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day?" Ibrahim's gaze stayed on the horizon. "All the time," he said, "and that's why I stop every time I can. You can't know what will come of it, but if you don't stop, you know exactly what won't happen." Moussa nodded, his hands resting on his knees, the grease under his nails still fresh from a day's work. "I used to think my life ended the day I sat down on that corner. Now, I think it started again the day you found me." For Ibrahim, this was never just about an old friend. It was about proving that morality and intelligence were not opposing forces in leadership, but partners. Morality without strategy could lead to empty gestures. Strategy without morality could build soulless systems. But together, they could restore dignity, rebuild lives, and reshape a nation's belief in itself. Months later, during a speech to young entrepreneurs, Ibrahim would recall the story of seeing Moussa in the rain. He would not frame it as an act of heroism, but as a reminder. The power to change lives, he told them, is not locked away in palaces or offices. It's in the choice to see people, really see them, and to act with both your heart and your mind. That choice is always yours. By then, Moussa's garage had expanded, employing 6 apprentices from the very program that had once saved him. The sight of the president occasionally dropping by, not for a photo, but to roll up his sleeves and hand Moussa a wrench, became a symbol across the country. For some, it was a story of friendship. For others, it was proof that even in a world hardened by politics, acts of genuine kindness still had the power to shift the course of many lives. And for Burkina Faso, it was a quiet revolution. One engine, one pair of hands, one second chance at a time.